Hello and welcome back to another episode of Exos Heroes, and today guys we're going to take a look at Valentina. I know Valentina has been out for a couple of days now, at least in the form of a patch note, but today we're actually getting the actual release as the game has just been updated, so we're going to jump in and take a look at just exactly how the new Valentina works and whether or not you should be spending your resources and zest on her. So let's take a look. And frankly, upon first glance, I am very torn between recommending her and also just totally trashing on her. Because frankly, if we look in isolation of just how good her skills could be and how high of a potential she has, I think there's definitely good reasons for why, we can comfortably recommend summoning her to just about everyone. But at the same time, there's certain nuances here that I think I just can't quite agree with the design of it. And I feel like it's relatively predatory, yet at the same time it feels like something that's more situational and you need to have other pieces in place at the same time to make it work. So all that makes me not 100% sure how I feel about it. But we'll get to that a little bit later. Let's just focus on taking a look at her skills first. So let's start with her passive. Mana Absorb 3, that's exactly how it was before, removes a buff from an enemy and gain 1 mana. It's a pretty decent skill, removing buff is nice to have, and in terms of mana generation, it's pretty consistent. Also removes 1 mana from the target, and then gains another mana if the health of the target is below 30%, so very decent skill, exactly the same as the base Valentina, and obviously she comes with the Flat Flap and Summer Blasting passive. Those are exactly the same as the ones we've seen so many times up until now, so I won't go into it too much. Interestingly, as a gold Fate Core, she does not have an added passive beyond just, I guess, the signature passive, right? The Flat Flap and Summer's Blessing, so I think that might have been the first time like something like that has happened, which is very interesting. But she does get that made up by having a couple of additional effects on her skills, so let's take a look at that. Her A1 now deals 150% damage to one enemy, afflicts target with Frostbite, dealing 92% damage every turn for 2 turns. So pretty much the same as regular A1, but Contempt passive gets a bonus. Now it does mana burn at 10 mana, which is great, right? That's the maximum amount you can have, to all enemies afflicted with Fear of the Abyss if the target is afflicted with the Fear of Abyss, and bind all enemies for 7 turns. And that cannot be removed. This is a very strong skill because one, it essentially allows you to silence them, not allowing them to use any skills by removing 10 mana from all enemies, and this is all enemies. So even though the damage itself is single target, but as long as you hit someone who has Fear of the Abyss mark on them, then that can get spread out to other people in terms of the mana burn. So that's very interesting, and it's really strong as well. As long as the enemy team has Fear of the Abyss on multiple team members, this skill will be AoE pretty much consistently. And then on top of that, afterwards, you're binding them for another 7 turns, which I would assume is just another type of stun. That's strong. 7 turns is a long time. Especially when you think about it, there are 10 heroes, 7 turns. Excluding Valentina, there's only 9 other people. Right? So 7 of the 9 won't get to move. That's huge. And if a couple of the other heroes has died, then that means no one else gets to move ever. So this is pretty strong. However, there are a couple of things we need to point out. One, Fear of the Abyss. Obviously, the only way to get Fear of the Abyss mark on the opponent's team is to have Shufraken. So you absolutely need to pair Valentina with Shufraken in order for this to work. Secondly, Fear of the Abyss, the way it works is Shufraken applies that mark to anyone who has lower defense than him. And that means you really need to have a good Shufraken, especially if you're thinking about the late game PvP, high elo PvP situations. It's going to be tough to get Fear of the Abyss on everyone unless your Shufraken is really a cut above the competition. So the good thing is Shufraken does have relatively high base defense as he is a fated defender, so it does make it a little bit easier if you want to get it just on the back row of the enemy team, which a lot of times is enough. But I think with the introduction of Dorka, and we potentially see kind of a more frontline heavy meta, then, this is something that we really need to watch out for, because if your Shufraken is not up to par, then you won't be able to use Valentina's skills to her full potential consistently. And obviously, if you don't have Shufraken, then, well, she's just not that good. And let's take a look at her A2 now. So her A2 got a little bit of a change. Instead of doing damage over time, I think that has been removed, and now it deals a little bit more damage at 525% to a single target. I like that change itself. I've always liked burst damage over time because, one, the existence of First Guardian heroes makes damage over time quite difficult to use. It gets a little bit better now, we have FC Iris, but in a lot of situations, if you don't have her, as she is the only hero that has Wet Fog, damage over time becomes a liability when you're up against First Guardian heroes. And also just, it gets countered by things like heal, it gets countered by things like cleanse. So much prefer just doing raw damage up front right away. So this is a good change, I do like it. And she still has the Contempt passive on her A2 as well, does the same thing as we mentioned on her A1. So again, this is a very solid skill, right? Not to say it's only 3 mana cost, so very efficient on that front as well. But the problem again is the same situation, right? It's so dependent on her synergy with Shufraken to make it work. The good thing is Shufraken right now is very solid, and he is definitely favored in the meta, especially paired with FC Iris, can be a menace in the front line. However, that might not always be the case. And this is the thing about this type of hero synergies that we always talk about. The reliance on synergies can work both ways, where a hero who is very good standalone, they can always be plugged into any situation or any meta. But if you have a hero that's reliant on another hero that requires a certain synergy to work well, not only are you tied to that specific hero, but if the other hero falls out of favor, then what do you do at that time? Do you keep bringing both of them in even though one of them is not really that good, or do you drop both of them? So that's something that I really don't like about this, and I typically rank heroes with these type of hero dependencies a little bit lower than heroes that are just great standalone, such as Bathory used to be. Maybe not so much anymore, but I digress. So those are the skills, and those are the new things that has been added to Valentina. Overall, if she is able to get paired with Shufraken, I think definitely she is going to be a very solid hero for you. But here are a couple of things I want to point out, and which is why I cannot just recommend summoning FC Valentina to everyone. First, for people who doesn't have Shufraken right now, you have to be very careful about dumping your resources into FC Valentina, because Shufraken is very difficult to get. I know the game is not 100% transparent with us, but I'm pretty sure the leader heroes, or the generals, right? The 5 that we have, Jinai, Shufraken, Garv, who else do we have? Rachel, and I'm missing one, someone else. Right, these 5 general Bathory, right? These 5 heroes that we have here, they are harder to get than other Fated hero. I know the game doesn't say that outright, but personal experience and based on everything we've seen from other people within the community, I'm pretty sure that is the case. So just understand that Shufraken is one of the rarest hero in the game, and it's very difficult to get. So if you don't have Shufraken, then Valentina is much weaker. And Valentina essentially doesn't bring anything special to your team than her base kit. Therefore, if you committed to summoning for Valentina and don't have Shufraken, you pretty much are committing yourself to not only summoning for Valentina, but also pretty much have to commit yourself to either do the string of creation for FC Shufraken, or commit yourself to the newly introduced national recruiting. So both requires pretty heavy resource investments, whether the string of creation or the national recruitment. So make sure you understand that, right? If you want FC Valentina and you want to use her and you don't have Shufraken, you are locked yourself into getting Shufraken one way or the other. And that to me it just feels very predatory in terms of the way line games approach this. Because if you look at all the gold Fate cores, right? Most of them are very good standalone. FC Iris, for example, she does not require anything, right? If you look at other heroes that are gold, FC Rira, FC Garv, all these heroes are amazing standalone heroes. And they should be, because they do cost a huge amount of resources from the players in order to get them. right? The full PD requires 28 summons. That is incredibly costly, and it's not something that we can get easily even for whales out there. And the fact that you have to spend all that resource into getting this hero and is still not able to use her true potential, to me, that is just absolutely over the line. Like, I cannot recommend with good conscience to anyone to do something like this, unless they already have Shufraken, obviously. So that's my biggest issue with Valentina's Fate Core. However, I do have one other issue that I want to point out, is the fact that because of the synergy with Shufraken, what happens is you are extremely limited when it comes to the flexibility of your team if you want to use Valentina. Because if we think about the current meta and the heroes that you must bring, right? FC Iris, you have to have her, as she is one of the best mana battery in the game. If you don't have her, then your team from a mana generation perspective is going to be way below your opponent. And she is also, at this moment, the only viable counter to the first Guardian heroes, right? So if you don't bring her, you put yourself at risk of getting taken out by the first Guardians. So you have to have FC Iris, right? Obviously, you have to bring FC Valentina if you want to use her. Then that means you have to lock in with Shufraken, because without Shufraken, FC Valentina is nothing, as we have already established. And with the introduction of Dorka, it's unlikely that if you have Dorka, you wouldn't bring her, because she is game-changingly strong, right? Her healing, her ability to reduce damage from the opponent's team, all magic damage by 30%. She is the meta-defining hero at this very moment. Now, so there you go. There's 4 out of the 5 spots on your team that has already been locked down. And given the current situation, I think one other hero that you would most likely to see an increase in play is someone like Ramga, right? Because of his anti-heal properties likely coming to the forefront of the new meta. And the fact he has decent synergy with Shufraken, and since you're bringing Shufraken, it does make sense to have him in your team. So that's pretty much the team you're always going to run. At least there are the 4 heroes that we mentioned: Iris, Shufraken, Valentina, and Dorka. And the only flexible option left in your lineup is that 5th spot. And now it's looking increasingly likely that Ramga is going to be the one filling that spot. So I think really that is the issue here, is like, with Valentina, you are somewhat locked in with this Valentina Shufraken synergy, and if you do bring Shufraken, it makes sense for you to bring Ramga as well, and then obviously you have the stable of Dorka and Iris there. Then what you're likely to see is kind of this repetition of the same lineup every single time. And I think that really is something that's detrimental to the fun aspect of the game, right? Because once you take variety and flexibility out of it, you're stripping yourself away a lot of the room for creativity. And that's something that I just can't quite stand behind. So just to recap, Valentina, obviously tremendously high ceiling, but a lot of dependencies and incredibly costly. So if you're someone who already has Shufraken, feel free to go for it. But if you're not, I would highly recommend you to think twice before committing to this specific banner. If you do think there is enough resources for you to go for Shufraken, then go for it. But otherwise, I would not be committing myself to something like this. But otherwise, that's it for us. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. And feel free to check out the rest of the content on our channel. Otherwise, we will see you in the next episode very soon. Peace.